So I've spent some time talking about Marxism and the influence of men like Saul Alinsky on our current socio-political um, environment here in the United States. I want to talk now about a shift in our language as it relates to a particular word. Um, that particular word would be worker. So in talking about the etymology of the word work, I'm not going to get into a complete historical breakdown of where the word work comes from or the word worker comes from, but work in and of itself isn't a bad word. All right. um, I don't have an issue with that. I think work is good. Coming from a Christian perspective, God designed man, created man to work. Man was working in the garden before the fall. Adam had a job in the garden. He was tending to the garden. He wasn't tending to the garden to repair it. He wasn't tending to the garden to free it of pestilence, of disease. But he was working. He was tending to it. He was harvesting. He was maybe performing the original acts or works of horticulture, or maybe animal husbandry at that time. I can't speak to exactly what he was doing, but God made man to work. And even later, as God gave the eternal moral law to man in written form, he talked about work and having a seventh day to rest. He demonstrated that himself in the creation account, where he worked. God created. He worked for. He rested, if you in a way that we can't understand, but he did that as a pattern, a symbol, an example for us. And when he did that, he had established not that work itself was bad, but that it was something that should be done, and that we should take a break from it. So work is a positive. Work is a good thing. And it was a conversation that I had with somebody just the last couple of days. We should be seeking to work, and that's a good thing. Now, no matter what the capacity of the work that you do, whether you're self-employed, employed in a small business, employed in a private sector, large corporation, in a factory, if you are a trash collector. So recently saw a video of a young man who was a trash collector. He loved his job, and you could tell he loved his customers, his clients, because there's video of him running to get a trash can that was not taken to the curb at the appropriate time. And instead of just passing by like many would do, this man ran up, took the trash can from the home, and he put it in the trash, or he emptied it into the end of the trash truck, and did so with apparent joy and oomph and vibrance. He loved his job. Work is good. I can't say that enough. But you are not a worker. You are an employee. Now, employee is some people may think I'm being pedantic and saying, well, they're workers, employees are the same thing. They're not. They are not. In today's meritocracy, what is left of it, and what is left for us, is you take a job. You take a career. You go to an employer. You don't go to a worker-y. You go to an employer, and you negotiate your time, and you determine what your time is worth to them. You determine what you're willing to do for that person for a set amount of money, whether it be hourly or on a salary, whether it be a monthly salary or a yearly salary. whether there are dividends, whether there are bonuses, whatever the benefits might be, you negotiate that with your employer, and you are hired to do a job. And you perform your work as an employee. So, where am I going with this? Over the years, ever since Marx worked on his Communist Manifesto, if you will, Marx saw a need. Actually, he saw a weakness. And the weakness that he saw was in the fine line of demarcation between the haves and the have-nots. Now, Marx, unlike his protege Antonio Gramsci, Marx was an economic Marxist. He believed in establishing an economic divide in the world wherein he could pit the haves and the have-nots on an economic level. And what he did to do that was he began to work on the workers, as he called them. The people who did the work, and he inundated them with these thoughts that somehow they weren't valued enough because they didn't have as much as their employers. And in some cases, there was abuse. No one's arguing that. I'm very thankful for changes to child labor laws. I'm very thankful to the changes to safety in factories. You look at the fact that there was a time where people, could be injured on the job and there was no recourse for them. They were fired. They were gone. The jungle definitely had a slant to it, had a bias to it, but it did talk about some of those dangers. But what Marx did and what his disciples did was to elevate employees over the employers, and they referred to them as the workers, and they pitted the workers against the ruling elite, against the factory owners, against the entrepreneurs, and they brought that language in, the workers, the workers, the workers, the workers, the workers. Because what it did is it continued to divide, it continued to fracture society and fracture culture. The workers against the non-workers, the producers against the non-productive. And anybody who, and we need to understand this, the non-productive people aren't the people who are sitting at home getting a check from a government agency, from a government entity. The non-productive are the people who own the factories, who own the businesses, who employ people, but aren't, in the eyes of Marx and his disciples, aren't actually doing anything. Those are the non-productive people. Those are the people who own property that are the problem. Those are the problems. You aren't the problem as the worker. And you're not. If you're an employee, you're not a problem. But you must view the people who are entrepreneurs, who create businesses, who develop businesses, who build up from the ground the structure that's needed to have a successful and growing economic society. They're the problem. The workers are then pitted against them, right? And we saw this over and over again, where labor unions and trade unions went from being a way for people to be watched out for so that they weren't being abused, that they weren't being injured and losing their income and losing their job because they were injured in the course of work, and went from that to now the workers set the standards for how the employers can operate. Now, let's look at our country today. In the last several months, we have watched something happen. We have watched employees go from being essential or just being employees to you're either an essential employee to a non-essential employee. Who determines that? someone in a position of power determines that. And it's not very often the employer. It's an outside agency. And more often than not, it's an outside agency that has nobody managing it, nobody watching over it, nobody taking their direction from a, if you would, neutral source. It's coming from a government agency telling the employer, here are your people that are important, here are your people that are not important. And so we went from essential personnel and non-essential. We went from personnel to essential and non-essential personnel to now you have workers. We must watch out for the workers, frontline workers, the frontline heroes. All right? That's communist think. That's Marxist think. And that's what the communist revolutions in every country have done. Look at these heroes of the movement. And who are they? They're the workers. And I did a video about this before. I'm like, you aren't a hero for doing your job. Cops aren't heroes for being cops. Firefighters aren't heroes for being firefighters. Soldiers aren't heroes for being heroes. To be a hero, you need to do something that's heroic. And doing something that's heroic doesn't mean going in to do your job every day. It's literally an act of overwhelming courage in the face of overwhelming odds, where you still go in at great risk to yourself when no one else would. So going in and working in a care center with 13, 14, 15 different people on your shift doesn't make you a hero. Okay? Doesn't make you a hero. Not at all. Working in a grocery store doesn't make you a hero. I've talked about this before. But it's a shift in the language. It's a shift away from the way we used to use the English language to actually understand what people do, to how now we're using the English language in Write, Think, and Newspeak to continue to further the divide in the United States between classes. It's classism. It's economic classism in this case. And there will be a video coming about Antonio Gramsci and his social Marxist theory, Gramscian theory. That'll be coming down the road. But you have to understand, when you start to hear people talk about the workers, they're using Marxist think. They're working actively to pit people against each other. I'm a worker, you're not. I provide, you don't. And there again, remember, the do not provide types aren't the people sitting at home taking a welfare check. Aren't the people sitting at home dependent on the state. Those that aren't, that are the enemy, that aren't providing, are the people who own the businesses, because they're not doing anything. And here's a subtle hint at where this came from in the United States. Several years ago, former President Barack Obama said to business owners, you didn't build that business, we built that business, referring to the American people. So if you look at a man who, let's say the man who starts off with a grocery store chain, very small, starts off with one store, next thing you know, in the next town over he's got another one, the next town over he's got another one, and the next thing you know, he's dominating a region with his business. He is doing well. Barack Obama, a student of Saul Alinsky, mind you, flat out stated, you didn't build that, your workers did, the American people did. Now, would he have a business without people doing business with him? No. But they wouldn't have a place to do business if it wasn't for him. That's a subtle shift, and we're hearing that all the time now. When they refer to workers, they're not talking strictly about employees. They don't want us to think about people as employees. And here's why. If you're an employee, you own responsibility for your actions, but you also owe your time to your employer. It's an exchange of service for financial compensation. It's a contract, if you will, between you and them. And what the Marxists want, what the communists want is they don't want us to have a contract privately. They want a contract between society and the people. They want society in control of that contract. They want to be able to control how much people make, how they make it, when they make it, all of the time. You're a worker, they're pitting you against your boss, against your manager, against the business owner, against the entrepreneur. You provide. Without you, everything will fall apart. Now, should employers treat their employees well? Absolutely. Should they be well compensated for the work that they do? Yes, but it should be based on the quality of the work that they do and not the fact that they're just a body. And we see this all over in cities and states that are now mandating that people be paid a mandatory minimum wage. Rochester, Minnesota is headed that direction. Minneapolis and St. Paul are headed that direction. Seattle in the last few years went that way and has absolutely devastated their economy. Because why? Because the workers deserve more. No, they don't. If you're an employee, you deserve what your employer pays you, and if you're not happy with what your employer pays you, then you go and negotiate for a higher wage, or you find a job that pays you better. But you aren't, as an employee, just automatically entitled to more money because society says you are. And that's immoral. Not amoral, it's immoral. So listen as we start to hear the media and others now start to pick up the usage of the word worker over employees. The usage of the word worker over the term staff. They may refer to staffing numbers being down in some places, but they're being staffed by workers, not employees. They're being staffed by workers instead of staff. This business is not staffed with a sufficient number of workers. And that is why we have to be careful with what we allow ourselves to adapt to and adopt by way of the language that we use. And I'm not referring to not using any references to workers. What I'm saying is what's the context of the word, and that is very important. Who's using it? Why are they using it? And what are they trying to do? Because everybody's trying to do something. Everybody has an agenda. It's true. And I've said this in numerous videos. I have an agenda. I have an agenda with this channel. I have very much an agenda. It's to fight against other agendas. That's the point of every podcast. That's the point of every YouTube channel. You have an agenda. And there's going to be somebody out there with a counter agenda to you. So I do have an agenda. But so do they. And the Marxists are out there, and we're seeing this all over. Are you an employee or are you a worker? Do you provide a service that you are equitably compensated for? Or do you come in and demand compensation without having anything to demonstrate exactly how much you're worth? That's the difference. Are you an employee working in contract with an entrepreneur who's building the economic basis and backbone for this nation? Or are you a worker demanding your just rewards before you've demonstrated your value? That's the direction they want to take us. They aren't interested in whether or not a worker is actually worthy. They're simply interested in making the worker worthy because he is a body. And they are going to use that to drive a deeper wedge between us. As always, thanks for watching the video. Thanks for being open-minded. Thanks for listening. I would ask that over here in the corner, somewhere on your screen, you hit the subscribe button. It's important, not for me, but because mainstream media, legacy media, isn't going to get the word out. They're not going to let people who don't toe the established line speak. So for the sake of liberty and for the sake of the defense of this nation, small little independent voices like mine need to be heard, especially the interviews. It's got very little to do with my commentary and a lot more to do with the interviews and the people who are affected when liberties are tread on. So once again, hit the subscribe button, like, subscribe, and share. Thank you very much.